Welcome to The Composter, a podcast for farmers and composters. I'm your host and fellow composter, Jane Werner. Join me in practical conversation between industry professionals and farmers with a passion for producing high-quality compost. We're going to dig deep into the science, technology, and art of compost production so that we as composters can help enliven the world's soils. Welcome to The Composter. I had the deep pleasure of talking to Rynk and Matthew Cotton in today's episode. Those two, who you may recognize as the authors of the Composting Handbook, just came back from a tour giving composting workshops to Australian farmers. They had an intensive 9 workshops given over 12 days, something like 1,600 miles traveled. Although a tiring trip for sure, they seemed to be even more optimistic about the future of composting after this. Listen in with me to hear what they have to say. Today's episode of The Composter is brought to you by Komptech. Today, more than ever, people are discovering the benefits of compost in gardens, landscapes, and agriculture. However, as composting awareness grows, so does consumer demand. As a result, commercial composters are seeking ways to increase year-round production while maintaining high levels of quality in their compost. For many, the solution is a better process. For over 25 years, Komptech has worked with scientists, agriculture experts, and customers to develop a proven 4-step process that produces healthy, contaminant-free compost while optimizing commercial production efficiency. This process is known as shred, turn, screen, and separate. You can learn more about the Komptech process at comtechamericas.com/composterpodcast. While you're there, request a complimentary consultation to discover if the Komptech process is right for your commercial operation. On our farm, Earthcare Farm, screening used to be the bottleneck in our process. We now have a Komptech M2 multi-star screener, and it has made our composting process much more efficient. Comtech Americas is proud to support the Composter podcast and is ready to help you make the most of a great opportunity. This episode is also brought to you by the Culinary Breeding Network and Glenwood. On Monday, October 16th from 4 to 8 p.m. at Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming in Cold Spring, New York, there will be an engaging evening of conversation, learning, and tasting brought to you by the Culinary Breeding Network and Glenwood. The Variety Showcase is designed to create connections among plant breeders, seed growers, farmers, chefs, bakers, distillers, retailers, distributors, and consumers. That's all of us. Attendees will have the unique experience to taste new and in-development vegetable, fruit, and grain cultivars. They can engage in conversation, share opinions, and take part in breaking down the walls between eaters and breeders. Tickets are available on both Culinary Breeding Network and Glenwood websites. Enjoy the show. Bob, we're going to start with you. You guys just came back from the Great Aussie Composting Roadshow. I love the name. Can you give us an overview of that trip to Australia, where you traveled, the operations you visited, and what the goals were? Matt, you can chime in too if Bob doesn't do a good job.
Yes, thank you, Matt, for having me back. Sure. The Great Aussie Composting Roadshow was an idea that our colleague Johannes Baala had several years ago. Johannes is the director of an organization known as CROWN, which is, I can get it right, it's the Center for Recycling of Organic Waste and Nutrients. So it's a rather clever acronym. And CROWN is associated with the University of Queensland in Australia. So Johannes was also an editor of the Composting Handbook, which was recently published.
Great book.
So this idea came about when we were getting close to finishing the Composting Handbook, and he thought it would be a good avenue to reach composters, especially farm composters in Australia, and use this roadshow to both promote composting among farmers and also give the Composting Handbook a boost. Perhaps at the time that he proposed this idea, wrote a grant for it. We were still not sure whether the Composting Handbook was going to retain its older name of the On-Farm Composting Handbook. But that didn't matter too much. At the time when he proposed the grant, and he and I talked about it, he said, there's a slim chance this is going to be funded, but if it does, would you be willing to come over and participate? And I said, sure. Always welcome a trip to Australia. And to everyone's surprise, it was funded, and then we had to gather things together to put the roadshow together. It took longer than usual because of COVID. It was supposed to happen sometime in 2020, and COVID got in the way of that. So by the time we got around to it, and we cleared all the commitments that developed in the meantime. It didn't occur till April 2023. And again, the goal was to promote composting mostly among farmers, both composting of agricultural waste and urban waste near farms, and also the use of compost among farmers. And it was a rather ambitious undertaking. Yeah. What did we do, Matt? 9 workshops in 12 days?
Yeah. And most people aren't going to be familiar with the names of the places we were. It was up along the eastern side of Australia, but not along the coast. So relatively small towns that most Americans wouldn't be familiar with. Colac, St. Arnaud, Great Shepparton, Tamworth, Pittsworth. So we were very much in the interior.
Off the beaten track where compost facilities should be.
Yeah, in farming areas. Yeah. Not great distances from the city, but far enough where it's normally not feasible to bring organic waste from urban areas out to these farming areas. But still, that happens in some cases.
How did you identify these areas? It actually suddenly is seeming like a daunting task to identify where to target.
Being Americans, we weren't qualified to identify those areas, so that was really Johannes's job, and his colleagues in Australia who he partnered with. A woman named Janine Price from Alexa, which is a veterinary company that does a lot of outreach to farms on a lot of issues, and Kevin Wilkinson, who's the director of Frontier Ag and Environment, a long time composting expert in Australia. So I don't know how much interaction they had on that, but it wasn't an easy task, from what I understand. Not only did they have to find locations where we can hold these workshops, identify places where the information was needed, but then find locations for the workshop, and then accommodations and things of that nature. So,
yeah.
It took some juggling.
Was it well received?
I think so. All the workshops were well attended.
Good.
Wouldn't you say, Matt?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jane. I think I would say yes. I think they were well attended. In some cases, I can only recall one case where a person sat through the entire workshop and then seemed very frustrated because coming out of COVID, she was angry that we were asking her to compost when she had trouble finding folks even to do the milking and the basic chores of her day. I don't know why she sat through the entire workshop and waited to the end to tell us that.
Just overwhelmed. Yeah.
People were excited. I mean, it was, I think it was probably more strategic than Bob and I know. Johannes and Kevin and Janine work with a lot of producers out there and work with a lot of the organizations like the pork producers or the egg producers. So they had a pretty good idea of where to go and where we think we would get the most folks. But these were rural areas and the distances are pretty great. So it was a lot. It was a lot. But really exciting, great questions. Every now and then we got a chance to visit a facility, not every day because sometimes the travel precluded that, but we did get to see some composting sites on vineyards and on farms and in some cases some municipal sites. So that was it was really exciting.
That's awesome. Is part of the grant, sorry, I'm going off our questions here because I'm just so excited about it. Is there a way to track like the impact if sites start up, if farms start composting? Anything for you guys to get feedback like that?
Yeah, we're just the. Sorry, Bob. I was going to say we were just the talent. We leave all the hard administrative stuff to Johannes. I'm sure there were grant requirements. And just a quick plug, Jane. I don't know if you know. Both Bob and I have taught this 5-day compost operator training course here in the U.S. for over a decade, and I've had extensive discussions with. There's an association called the Australian Organic Recycling Association, and we've been talking about trying to bring a training course over. All of that because I met with some of the Aurora folks when I was over there. We talked about the workshop, and everywhere we went on this tour, we ran into composters who were very interested in training. So I think there was quite a bit of interest at every scale, from relatively small to even larger sites. We talked to an egg producer. We got a chance to tour Yellowtail, which is a very large. Listeners probably are aware that's a very large. I think it's the second largest vineyard or wine company in the world after Gallo here in California. So they're starting up composting, which is very exciting. Got to tour there. So there's a lot of interest, a lot of activity to bounce into the questions. It's very similar. I think listeners from the U.S. going to Australia would find the composting world very similar. And then particularly for me on the West Coast, it's very generally hot and dry, and moisture is a challenge. But the questions they're asking, the challenges they're facing are all very similar. So I guess that's a long way of saying it was very well received, and there were some really interesting questions, and I see a lot of potential over there.
Super relatable.
And they also face the same challenges that farmers do here. There was lots of other priorities on farms before they get to consider composting as another venture to dive into. But 100%. The opportunities exist to came up.
That's super exciting. Is it a little different? So here on the East Coast, we have our urban areas are actually pretty close to the farm areas. Like Rhode Island is so small, you can cross the whole state in an hour. So Providence isn't very far from our farm in Charlestown, even though people act like it is because it's 35 minutes away. But if there's actually a listener from Australia, Ashley Wern, I'm going to give him a shout out. And he was saying that the urban areas are so far from the farm areas, making composting a challenge for getting the food scraps and things from the city centers out to the farms. Do you feel like that is a challenge for the composting industry there, or did you see ways around that?
I think that it is a challenge. There was some discussion about that within the workshop questions. But it's not like there aren't any farms near the urban areas. Within the urban areas, it's an environment similar to the East Coast where there are smaller farms surrounding the urban areas. And then there are large agricultural areas that are distant. So, yes, it is a challenge. It's a challenge in both directions. Bringing urban organic materials to a farm to be composted and bringing farm-made compost to urban areas where it would command a higher price. Matt, what would you say?
Yeah, I think that's a classic "it depends" question, because certainly we've both of us have been over Australia a number of times and been able to tour farms that are close to urban areas. Certainly down in Adelaide, that's the case. But it depends. And Australians, most of the populations around the coast, and they are used to driving tremendous distances for all sorts of things. So I think they have maybe more of a West Coast perspective in that they understand the distances may be longer than ideal, but they're willing to make that work and figure out backhauls. And I think it's still emerging because the distances do matter, and hauling heavy feedstocks or heavy compost can be significant over long distances. So they're figuring out what works and what doesn't, just like we are here.
Yeah, the trucking is always our biggest challenge when it comes to getting material out here. It's so heavy.
Yeah.
And it kind of feeds into like this new pelletized compost that seems to be getting a lot of foothold in Australia. Did you guys see any of that or observe that trend of pelletizing the compost for the vineyards?
We didn't actually see it, but we did have dinner with a gentleman who was just starting that, and he shared some of his product, and that was a fascinating. I'm very curious to follow up. That was a very large cattle company, and they were pelletizing the cattle manure as a really interesting way to really meet the users where they are, because they're used to pelletized fertilizer. So it solves some of the distribution, the immediate distribution of the soil challenges. So that was really interesting. So I think that's definitely happening. We didn't see a lot of it, but I know it's happening.
Okay.
No, but I understand. We had a podcast with Peter Wadowitz.
Yeah.
And he does some of that.
He does.
And we did see it on his farm, or on his composting operation, several years ago. And he was working out the pelletizing system, and does take some work to get it right, the right density of pellets hold up. So I expect that to find quite a bit of use there, simply because they're pushing it, and there seems to be a demand for it. We've had some attempts at that here in the U.S. They haven't taken hold too much, to my understanding. In California, Matt, have they?
Yeah, I'd say the same. I'd say it's mixed results. I think a lot of people look at it, and when you figure in the cost of equipment and the challenges of market development, and again, we're very fortunate here in California. Our ag is relatively close in most cases, and they seem to be absorbing and eagerly using all the compost we can make. So we don't need to. Diversification isn't the obvious thing that we're spending time on, but there's interest, and I get calls from that from time to time. I think it will develop. It's a great way to get the product to users who aren't using it or are familiar with a pelletized product or have equipment to spread pelletized products. And so I think we'll see that develop, but it's been slow because it's a challenge. There's a lot. I was amazed learning some of the stuff from these gentlemen in Australia. I think that was, oh gosh, I don't know if that was, which city that was, maybe Dalby. I don't know. It was later on in the show, and we've driven a lot of miles, but they had a lot of stories about trying to get the density right and the temperatures working, and it's a lot. It's a manufacturing process that most composters don't have a lot of experience in.
Yeah, it would be daunting for me to get into that, and I wonder if the microbial life can hold up as well, getting that process right. Mine are like thriving in this, like cake mix kind of texture. And I don't know if I'm messing around, but it still would be great organic matter to be adding into fields, even if it wasn't as high of the microbial life in there.
That's a good question about what the impact is on microbial life, because the pelletizing process does create some heat, but so does composting.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has to be relatively dry. So I suspect it's not a great impact, but would be a good question to study. And maybe there's somebody who has or is doing that. I don't know. Not familiar.
I'm always impressed too, like the resilience of microbes. Like even in those dehydrated kind of systems, you can add water back in, and I can test it later, and there's still, the life comes back in a couple days. So, I don't know, maybe they just go dormant for a bit and can come back. So,
as Matt likes to remind us, the microbes that ultimately prevail in the soil are mostly going to be the ones that are adapted for that soil generally, not just the compost that's applied there.
Mm-hmm. That's wise. Yeah, and the organic matter helps that all out. This episode of the Composter Podcast is brought to you by High Country News. High Country News is an independent, nonprofit publication that has been covering the Western United States for more than 50 years. HCN provides unique, on-the-ground reporting on the land, water, wildlife, and communities of the region, with dedicated coverage of climate, environmental, and indigenous issues. Sign up for free newsletters or a trial of the magazine at hcn.org/no-till. This episode is also brought to you by Xsense. Xsense is an innovative company that provides home safety products, including cutting-edge smoke detectors, carbon monoxide alarms, and other smart home security systems designed to keep you and your loved ones safe 24/7. I'm excited to check out their humidity monitors, which will be helpful for monitoring the humidity while drying our farm's garlic. With easy-to-install devices and smart technology, you'll have peace of mind knowing that Xsense is always on guard. You can purchase Xsense products from xsense.com or simply search Xsense on Amazon. And now, back to the show. All right, this is a big question, and I think I'll ask Matt first. What is your vision for the future of composting? Just a small question.
Just a small question, and that's interesting because I'm the chair of the program committee for the U.S. Composting Council. We had a meeting yesterday. We're just talking about a session where we could have some manufacturers, some composters, talk about that question and address that question, where we're going to be in 5 years and 10 years. I think, I guess bottom line, the future is great. I'm very excited about the future of composting. I see, and Bob and I have been teaching together for the last decade or so, and it's afforded us this amazing opportunity to travel to China a couple of times and to Australia a couple of times. And everywhere I go, I see the same commitment and the passion and the interest. And I think people are all around the world are trying to divert food waste from landfills today. And I think we're going to figure that out or get further along in figuring that out because it's really challenging. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the future. I think more facilities, smarter facilities. We are going through a golden age of compost research here in California, which hasn't always been the case, but there's probably more actual academic research around composting and around climate change than any time in my time out here, last 30 years. So that's really exciting. We're hiring postdocs. We're building facilities. I just saw that Queensland, where Johannes works, their local government just committed 150 million Australian to what they call adorably FOGO, which is food organics, garden organics. So the idea of taking what we might call yard trimmings and putting the residential food waste in that and providing the bins and all that involves. So this is happening around the world. We realize these nutrients, this organic matter, is incredibly important to soils, getting back in the soils, growing healthier food, having healthier soil. I think that message is getting out. So I expect the future is just more of that. In the slow, plodding way that composting develops. It's never, my frustration with the industry is it never happens as quickly as I'd like it to. But it does. If I try to look back and think of even the things we were teaching 10 years ago, Bob, the focus, the emphasis on process is different. And the reach is different. The sophistication is different. The application of different machines is different. The ability to sell compost is better. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the future.
Bob, what about you?
Yeah, I share Matt's optimism about it. And I also agree with his observation that the progress is slow and plodding. It's been that way almost forever. My personal vision reflects my personal bias, and Matt and I have had several conversations surrounding this, just to preface my statement, and that is, I like to see composting on a distributed basis. My bias is that I like farm composting, and so I see more composting operations that are smaller and distributed around, and mostly taking place on farms. I mean, if we're going to do that, we're going to put composting everywhere, and we're going to need to engage farms to help do that. But similar to an operation like yours, Jane. So smaller, more dispersed, operations, and that each have a small impact, but collectively have a large impact. That's tough to do. And Matt rightly points out the challenges involved in doing that, because farms don't always do composting right. I mean, we like to think they do, but farmers have other priorities, as I said earlier, and sometimes composting is not the highest priority and it gets ignored. So we've had some bad examples of on-farm composting as well as good ones. So I'd like to see that develop more, especially as food, as residential food waste becomes a larger, more of it becomes targeted to a composting operation. And so I think we're going to have to engage more places to do composting. The reason I like smaller facilities is because I think there's less challenge with odors and fires in that case. Less challenge. That doesn't mean it's bad. And then I think the compost can be used on site as needed, but can also be sold off site. Again, there are a lot of challenges with that. Regulations can make it difficult. But that's where I would like to see the future of composting going. At the same time, I see some technical improvements being made. There's a move toward forced aeration systems, and some of those are fairly sophisticated. And that's sort of, it doesn't preclude farms from doing that, but the more sophisticated they get, in order to pay for that, you need to have economies of scale and centralized operations. I see it advancing on both those lines, hopefully, in my mind.
Can you repeat that one last line? It kind of cut out a little bit.
I'm sorry. I see composting advancing on both those lines, both diverse, widely distributed, smaller composting operations, and then some, as well as concentrated places with better technology and better science backing them up.
Yeah, I see both of that too. I like that.
Just to be clear, I'm not against distributed composting, and one of the great joys of getting to teach with Bob this past decade and with our colleague Terry Oceans over the years is we get to have these years-long debates about some of these big questions, and it's been such a joy to challenge and evolve my thinking on that. But I've really come around, especially here in California, where we've got very aspirational legislation to really get a lot of organics out of the waste stream. And I think, and a colleague of mine, Nick Lapis, has taught me this slowly over the years, that it's going to take all of this. It's going to take robust community composting, and it's going to take all the on-farm composting that makes sense, as well as centralized composting and situations we haven't even thought of to really manage all this organic material efficiently, properly, thoughtfully. And I don't think it's a challenge. It's certainly not a competition between one or the other, although that happens sometimes because of economics, because of feedstocks. But I think it's going to take all those things to make this work. And you know, Jen, you've focused so much on quality composting and what farmers really want, and that's fantastic and important, and that's a niche or a role. And there's a very large, I guess I'm trying to say, it's a large continuum of possible composting out there. I just expect all of that to grow and become more common. We're really far away. I was talking at our state recycling conference last week, and just about everybody in the U.S. has some access to a landfill, and then a smaller circle within that has access to a curbside recycling program, and a much, much, much smaller subset has access to some kind of curbside recycling organics program. So we have a long way to go, and there are economic realities and material realities and market realities. So we'll make it as much as we can, but hopefully we'll have the strength to know what projects don't make sense and which ones do. And it's really interesting and somewhat unsung, although there are heroes among you. But the rise of the community composting. I don't want to call it an industry; that's the wrong term. But movement, the community composting movement, as you will, is really exciting, and lots of activity here on the West Coast, certainly on the East Coast, and all points in between. These younger folks generally, collecting organics, seeing the connection, composting that material, and they have a lot of growth potential, a lot of things to learn. We're integrating them into the U.S. Composting Council from time to time, and that's a really exciting growth area. And then how that fits and when do those grow, and a lot of that ends up on farms, and more urban farms and more rural farms. And just, again, the more you look, the more you see, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's really exciting. It's an exciting time.
I love the impact of the community composters in that they truly connect people with the compost.
100%.
For me, I'm getting 30 tons of fish scraps from someplace or food scraps, but it's not connecting the person who used that to our farm. And then that community composter's making that, like, you're bringing your food scraps to that pile. You see it, you see your impact. It changes your thinking. So even if the impact of the amount of tons might not be as huge, the impact on our thought process is phenomenal. So
it's really exciting. We've had just the beginnings of some community composters here in California really partnering with what we might call the haulers, the folks that are collecting the yard waste and the food scraps. And there's a really interesting role because they do tell the story really well, and they are connecting on an individual level with the customers and with the users, the folks that come out to the gardens, the community gardens that they're associated with sometimes, and are providing food, fresh food, sometimes in food impoverished places. So yeah, there's an amazing connection there that has multiple benefits beyond just the individual connection, but to the community, to the region. And I expect to see that continue to grow and play a role and build community and build infrastructure. And I really want to see those more interaction between the smaller, and it's not that they're small, but the work that they do with the work that the larger ones do, because obviously to really manage organics from a large urban area, you're going to need large companies, large trucks, large capital, but there's a role for all of it, I guess. I hope we can all get along and realize we're all moving the same direction. We're all on the same team with the same goals.
Yeah. This kind of came up in an interview with Michael from LA Compost, but we all need to we just released that podcast this week, and it was a great conversation. But if we as composters can think of ourselves as if we're like nature, and we need lots of insects and lots of mice and lots of foxes and a couple of big predators, to bring the balance to the whole system. That's our role, right? Is we want to just have lots of layers.
Martino is an amazing human being and a great composter, and he's a poet. I love hearing him speak. I love what he's built. I love the way he approaches it. And he's at the forefront of making those connections. I love the ecosystem metaphor. That's fantastic. So
it connects us back to nature too, which we are a part of, and I think that'll strengthen our compost future for sure if we can see that. Great.
Making that connection, especially in urban areas like Los Angeles, where people are very far from where their food is grown and maybe have no or very little connection to that, but to remind them that this is a system, a very circular system where the food they eat nourishes them, and the food they don't eat can go back to the soil to nourish the soil and grow more plants. Is just a really important story that Michael tells, and all of his staff over there at LA Compost tell so well. It's very impressive.
Yeah, you can't not see your connection to the greater whole. So it's awesome. I'm leaving on Monday to go to Austria for a compost tour there. And
great. Oh, fantastic.
I know.
I'm jealous. You're going to see
I know.
You're going to see our friend Florian.
I am.
Love Florian.
Yep, I'm going to see Florian. And I have a week actually with Komptech. I get to go for a tour of their manufacturing plants in Slovenia and Austria. And then I think we're going to 9 different compost operations. But from what I understand is it sounds like what we want to get to here. Have you guys been there? With composting, like it seems like there's a great curbside collection. There's community composters, a lot of farm composters, a couple of big ones, and 75% of the organic matter is composted. So I have not been. I've certainly looked at it. I've known Florian
for a while now. We got to teach together down in Brazil, of all places, and because he had done some postdoc work there in the 80s, I think. But interesting guy. I've not been, but I am aware of I've heard some of the stories of Austria. I think that's going to be a great trip. And yeah, we're very jealous. You're going to learn a ton. And it's going to be great to see that many facilities with all those smart people over there. It's challenging, I guess, to go to another country and see what they're doing and then try to take that. There are definitely lessons there to be brought back to the U.S., but I don't think the U.S. resembles Austria in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So what works there may not always work, but there are some really great. There's some very thoughtful composters, some very thoughtful municipalities that really do put a system together. So I don't want to understate that they've done some amazing things. I try to be careful when trying to take lessons from other places and bring them to the U.S. as the things like just the cost of garbage, the price of electricity, the distances, the nature of it. Austria does have a lot of small farms really close to urban areas, so there are some opportunities. But wow, what a fantastic opportunity!
My hope is
that's.
Sorry, Bob,
you
go.
I was going to say, although there are differences, that the models you find in Austria might work best for the northeastern United States, where you are located, than in California, and Midwest, or even South. But yeah, it's a great trip. I'm jealous too.
That's exactly what I was thinking for Rhode Island. Rhode Island, if I can, it sounded when Florian was talking about it. There's 8 million people in Austria, and there's 400 farm composters, and that's mostly what's handling all the organics. I thought about Rhode Island because we have 1 million people. Our city is not far, and everything's pretty close. There's actually a bunch of farms. They're all kind of small, but I think the potential for modeling that here is pretty high compared to California, you're right, or Texas or something like that. But I don't know, why not do it here?
The crops are some of the things you grow in Rhode Island, are they similar to what's grown? Because I think that is a really an interesting connection point when you see a tomato grower getting better yields or whatever it might be, to transfer that knowledge and the interest in that level. But yeah, wow.
It does sound like a similar growing, like we're very, I know that the garlic that thrives here is German extra hardy here at my farm. A lot of the German crops do really well here, so I picture it being similar to Austria, but I'm going to find out.
Well, a great trip, and hopefully many podcasts will come out of it.
Yeah, I plan on that. Where are you guys going next? You guys seem to have a lot of fun traveling together. I saw you in California, and there was laughter every few minutes for sure. What are you gonna do next?
That's a good question. We always try to have irons in the fire. Most of them go cold before they come out, but we have. Well, our next confirmed gig is our usual Fundamentals of Composting workshop at the U.S. Composting Council's annual meeting. So that's in Daytona Beach in January. What else are we going there? Nothing really, just fine.
Nothing firm. We're talking to folks in British Columbia. We dream of going to Alaska. I'll be teaching the 5-day course out in Texas in October, which I'm really excited about because we've only done that once before. And Texas is doing a lot of composting, and they're pretty quiet about it. They're not a state that does ambitious legislation the way we do. Their legislation only meets every other year, but there are really an impressive number of facilities and interest levels and potential there. So that's exciting. But as far as Bob and I's course, we don't have it laid out. But, we don't. I think it's fair to say we never planned this. Bob and I had a casual conversation back in the early 2000s. And said, hey, you're working on this book. Why don't we maybe put a class together? And it has taken us around the world quite unexpectedly and unintentionally. I wish we could say we had planned this all along, but we really didn't. We just I've certainly benefited tremendously from the partnership and the opportunities to meet so many composters and tour facilities around the US and around the world. So, but we don't. We hope there'll be more to come. COVID certainly put the lid on a lot of that. We just gotten back from China, and started to hear bits and pieces of this COVID thing, and we'll see. The world is slowly coming back, but it's been a privilege, and I hope we'll get to do more travel, and certainly I enjoy it as much, whether it's in the U.S. or out of the U.S. Like I said, we hope to do British Columbia here coming up, and Bob said Florida, but we'll see. Hopefully it'll continue.
Well, I'm going to see you both in Florida. I'll definitely be there. I'm going to bring my whole crew. Really pumped.
Great.
And anything else you want to add or let the listeners know, or any resources that these composters can't live without besides your handbook, which they all know about?
Yeah, we haven't pimped the handbook, which everyone should look at for sure. I just want to say thank you for the interest and the opportunity. Really been enjoying the podcast, and I'm thrilled when I go around. I think I mentioned I was in Minnesota and people were asking me about the podcast. So I love the work that you're doing, getting the word out. So thanks.
That's cool.
Thanks.
Congratulations, Dan. It's done well. You've done well.
It's been really fun. And like I said earlier when we were talking, you guys do put the fun in fungi. I've never had a conversation with you two that I haven't been laughing at some point. So
we haven't used that line in marketing our workshop yet, man. Sure.
You got to bring it in because it's very true. There's a lot of passion. I love it. Great. Well, thank you so much for being on, and I'm sure I'll have you on again. But, Bob, you're the first person to be on twice, so.
I'm honored. Do I get a plaque?
You get some kind of prize.
You get a plaque till 3. On your third one, you get a plaque, Bob. So
yeah. Okay. Now you get to wear a sash. All right.
I'll put it over my brochure.
Sure. I will share that photo of you guys with your purple shirts on with this audience, just so you know.
And there is one thing I want to say. I want to just acknowledge Johannes' efforts in getting that great Aussie composting roadshow together. He really is the one that did the work, and you might want to have a podcast with him someday to get more accurate information about what's going on with in Australia. And Johannes' wife Ingrid did a lot of work toward it as well, and the whole team that worked on the workshop. So,
great, awesome shout out. All right, any last words, Matt? We're ready. We good?
No, I just would echo Bob. Thanks to Johannes and Ingrid and Kevin and Janine. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. But 9 cities in 10 days, a lot of driving in between and a lot of miles. But I love that Johannes had the vision and the imagination to put that together and to get this information, sometimes pretty technical information to people to try to interpret and figure out if that could fit in their farm. It was a really amazing opportunity and some great outreach. I don't know if I would squish it all into 2 weeks that way.
9 workshops is a lot.
It's a lot, but I'm thrilled to be able to participate in that and would go over there in a heartbeat. I hope we could do something similar over here. I hope we get that type of support and interest. And I think we will as people find the benefits more and more and see that there's a lot of connections that need to be made and networks to build. And so
awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys spreading that word around. The world needs it so badly. So awesome. I appreciate you both so much. And thank you for being on the Composter.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, that was so fun. I love this vision those two have of the compost ecosystem with lots of composters at every scale. If all of us start envisioning this, it is sure to happen. Thank you to Bob Rynk and Matt Cotton for spearheading getting all this compost knowledge out into the world. Here's my plug for their book, The Composting Handbook, as well as Matt's Compost Operator course, which will be in Texas in October. I'll put a link in the notes. Shout out to the team at No Till Growers for producing this. I'm always giving thanks for the toe-tapping music of Soul Shot, and so much gratitude to all of you listening and loving on Compost.